Don't turn it off. Just place it to silent. However, if you want to say things like, you want to tweet away and say that you're at hashtag Skylight Books, feel free to do that. If you want to trend, here with, hashtag Gilbert Hernandez, feel free to do that too. Okay, we're all about Web 2.0. All right. With that, we also wanted to say, please check us out at World Wide Web, skylightbooks.com. We have some really terrific writers who will be coming. Emerging writers, a wonderful writer named Steph Cha will be here on the 30th, coming out with her first book. Literary Fiction Factory, Joyce Carol Oates, will be here on May 6th, so that should be lots of fun too. So there's some terrific people coming. But today, we are here for Gilbert Hernandez. Gilbert Hernandez. Sorry, Gilbert, about that. Delayed reaction. Gilbert Hernandez was born in 1957 in Oxnard, California. Yeah, Oxnard. In 1981, he co-self-published the first issue of Love and Rockets with his older brother, Mario, and younger brother, Jaime. Jaime is here. Where are you? Right over there at the side. He'll be signing books of it too. So just so you know, just let you know. Embracing strong female lead characters and punk rock culture, this series stood out from the male-dominated comics landscape of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The following year, Love and Rockets was picked up and republished and continued as a series by Fantagraphics Books. Gilbert Hernandez and his brother Jaime have continued Love and Rockets for 3 decades. Raise your hand if you're younger than 30 years old. Older than you, okay? Older than you. Okay, just so you know. In the ensuing years, Hernandez has been nominated for and won nearly every industry award, as well as the prestigious United States Artists Literature Fellowship. Hernandez currently lives in Las Vegas, Nevada, with his wife Carol and his daughter Natalia. We have him here tonight. Please welcome Gilbert Hernandez.
So, it all begins in the 1940s, where Mom read comic books. She happened upon a Captain Marvel comic book when she was a kid, and she just happened to like the way it looked. She hadn't really seen a comic book before, and so she started seeking them out. In those days, they were 10 cents, so it was okay to buy comic books for a little kid. Even with inflation, it's still a lot cheaper than they are now. But she collected them, and then she thought they were really cool, and her mom, she had to hide them from her mom because she thought they were trash and they were just cluttering up the house. So she decided to, keep them a secret. She would swap them with friends and things like that. And then she grew up and got married, and then she had an older brother Mario. This was in the 50s. And in order to keep him quiet, because he was running around the house too much, she would give him comic books. And so then I came along, then Richard, then Jaime, Ismael, and Lucinda, and what kept us quiet was either reading comic books or drawing them. So I was born into a house of comics, never knowing that we didn't think it was weird. We didn't think we were the weirdos in the neighborhood. It was just normal, and we began to learn to draw from them. Somehow the medium for us. So I just wanted to present some of the comic books I read, if I can get the working. Okay. There we go. Okay. These things, you know, only little kids can work them. And I just wanted to go through the comic books that influenced me the most to be inspired to do comic books for 30 years instead of getting a real job. The cover, that's Marvel Season. That's my newest book, and it's actually a lot of the comic books mentioned in that book are real, and I'm going to show a couple of them tonight. I wanted to do a graphic novel just about what it was like to be 10 years old. And I wanted it to be a story where everybody could relate to it. Even if the time, the place and time is a generic mid-60s, I wanted it to be something that anybody can understand. It's for all ages. But I wanted to go through the specific comics that really inspired me to do comics and why I'm still doing them today. Now the cover, you'll see the kid with the dark hair. Originally, in the story, he has a mustache. But if I had put the mustache on him on the cover, he would look like an adult. But he was just representing those kind of kids that moved in, came to your classroom in the middle of the year. You didn't get why he had a mustache. he's 11, And so anyway, that's my homage to those kids that you never knew where they're from and never knew where they went after. They were only there for maybe 3 months out of the year, and then they were gone. So here we go. All right, Ghost Stories. That's the first scary comic I ever saw. This is came out, I guess, in 1962. It has a beautiful cover. It looks like a block print. But I was so scared of it, I didn't want to look at the inside. This is just too, there's no way. I'm not going to go in there. But once I got older, but like a lot of things that scare you at first, you tend to keep thinking about it, wondering well, what is in there? And my older brother Martin said, it's just a scary book. It's pretty cool. All right, open it up. So here's the first story about this giant snake hand. Okay, I put this up because the last panel is just so magnificently creepy. And the story's even beyond creepy. This is after the comic books of the 50s that were banned because they're too violent, but somehow they snuck this one out in the 60s. It's basically a story about in this creepy neighborhood where small children are being kidnapped, are missing. And now and again, somebody would find a little balled up wad of clothing. It was all bloody. And nobody knew why, and then those turned out to be the missing kids. This is before DNA. So basically, this guy at the bottom, he's a little kid at the beginning of the story. He wants to figure out the secret of what happened to his sister. So this turns out that there's this creepy alien hand or whatever. It's been living, in the sewers, and it comes out and looks for children. And it's got pores that absorb human life, so it just crushes the children into a ball. And that's why he's crushing the trash can looking for a kid. Anyway, I'm getting to the good part. No, but anyway, what happens is right before the hand gets him, the cops blow up. All of a sudden, there's explosions, and the snake arm blows up. And the kid goes, "Well, how'd you guys know I was here?" He goes, "Oh, we've been here the whole time. We just wanted you as bait, And even as a kid, I thought, that's the sickest, what the hell? Well, it turns out that the story is written by John Stanley. Now, John Stanley is most noted for writing Little Lulu comics. Some of the best written comic books ever, in mainstream comics. So sometimes he would take side projects and write something like that. And this is, a tribute to his talent. He could write some of the best kid stories ever, and then I guess when he felt sick, he just write a few of these. He did a lot of these, but this is one of the early ones. I'm just getting toward, now this just sort of got me going with there's an interesting point of view from certain comics. The writing has a lot to do with it, besides this great creepy art. Now, of the three main influences I want to talk about, Jack Kirby's one of them. And this cover is only here because of the 2 pages that come after that were in the issue. But I wanted to make note of Jack Kirby's monsters. Now, he's a Marvel artist that basically he's the reason why the Avengers is any good, the movie. They're all his ideas. And basically, he used to with his wings and horns and, you know, flaming through the skies and such. But when he got older, his monsters just became lumps. Just big old, goofy, silly, putty, I don't know. But they're still kind of effective. You know, he kind of looks like the Thing and the Hulk at the same time, and then a big piece of poop. But anyway, I'll just throw that in. But Love and Rockets is often talked about they talk about the strong women characters. And here's a version of strong women characters that Jack Kirby came up with. Okay, now there is so much invention in this double-page spread that any one of those characters could have their own comic. That's how Kirby's imagination was. He could just come up with this stuff, and each individual has their own attitude, their own costume, their own way they pose, their own spitting anger, as you can tell. One gal in the middle is just polishing her weapon, doesn't care what's going on. The other one's getting into a fight. And actually, Kirby, during this time, this is after his work for Marvel, after Stan Lee was scripting his work, that he scripted his own stuff, and he was always criticized for the poor dialogue. Like, oh, he's not as good dialogue writer as Stan Lee. But if you look back at the old Marvel comics and you read the dialogue by the women, it's pretty lousy. It's the Invisible Girl and Marvel Girl have powers that come from their mind, yet they're always weak. Oh, I feel faint. Oh, what shall we do? Not in Kirby's world. They just came out there whipping ass, and they were always focused, and they always knew what they were doing. So, and Kirby doesn't get credit for that. So the dialogue he probably wrote for those characters back in the Marvel days was probably a lot better than what Stan Lee came up with. I'm saying Stan Lee did a really great job overall, but the details were probably changed because basically the artists like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko would write the stories, and then Stan Lee would fix up the dialogue to make it work better, and he did a damn good job at it. But I think something was lost sometimes. Anyway, but Jack, this is just a great double-page spread, and like I said, there's no other cartoonist in mainstream comics that could even come close. All right. Now we start getting closer to Jack Kirby's personality, I believe, anyway, allegedly. This is Jack Kirby, inked by Steve Ditko, who is Marvel's other genius in the 60s, who co-created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. And so what you have is the panel. Oh, this comic is mentioned. I put it up there because it's also mentioned in Marvel Season, the actual comic. I put this page up because, okay, the Hulk's busting in. He's gonna, he's sick of these aliens that are trying to take over the Earth, and they're scared. They go, uh-oh, now we're in trouble. Third panel, he's grabbing the guy. The fourth panel, in the middle, is the one that always intrigued me. Look at his expression. He looks like a demented cross between Kirby and Boris Karloff. But he looks so nasty, because in the first issue of the Hulk, he actually looked kind of handsome. He's gray, and he was kind of good looking, and it didn't really work. So by the next issue, they uglied him up, turned him green, and made him more violent. Well, in that middle panel, he's blasting the aliens with their own gun. The next panel is just a hilarious comedic explosion with the bodies flying around. Then the next panel, last tier with the first panel, they're begging for their life, and then the Hulk's looking for somebody else to beat up. But I always suspected, even after a while, that was actually Jack Kirby in the panel, drawing himself blasting Stan Lee. Because later on, when I met Jack Kirby, he's very passive-aggressive, very pleasant guy, but once he'd get worked up talking about Stan Lee and what was stolen from Marvel, that's what sort of represents that. So, that middle panel I was taking, it's almost worth a poster or something. Now we have Ditko by himself, who co-created Spider-Man. Ditko for me is the definitive Spider-Man artist because I was there when he was doing it. Most people prefer John Romita Sr. and the artist afterwards because they're a little more easy to take. Because Ditko's art is basically grotesque, but that's what I liked about it. It was just almost, it didn't belong. It was like gothic horror art. This guy doing superheroes. I pulled out the Spider-Man page because it has a couple of things in it. The third panel in the middle has his Aunt May crying, and it's very sad. up in the attic because she's reminiscing her slain husband who was murdered by a burglar who had broken in. And Spider-Man's looking, and he's bummed out, going, oh man, he gets really bummed out, and he's walking around. Spider-Man after this was bummed out for 50 years. It just turns out that he's thinking back that it was his fault. Yet, if you've seen the films and the two origins of Spider-Man, they kind of messed up the story that the comic had. And in the movies, basically Spider-Man gets burned. Like he doesn't get paid from some guys, and so when this crook runs by him, they say stop him. He says nah, because you burned me, right? Later on, the crook happens to kill his uncle, so Spider-Man's full of guilt. And the recent movie, the same thing. He's being treated bad in the liquor store or something like that, and so when the crook gets away, he doesn't care. Gets away and kills his uncle. Well, in the original, it's actually more real and sadder, because basically, when Spider-Man came on the scene, he was actually performing on television. He wasn't a superhero yet. He got the powers, he got the costume, but he performed on television to make money. And so when he's leaving the studio one day, he's making a lot of money, he's becoming a star. The scene with the burglar runs by because he's robbing the studio. And they say, stop that guy, stop him. He goes, no, why? I don't need to. I'm a star, I don't need to do that. So later on, he comes home, his uncle's slain and murdered. So that gives him, his real angst, the real horror of his life after that. And so think about it. It's funny. The comic was written in '63, and it actually has more weight than the films did because I don't know, it wasn't in Hollywood. All right. This is going to continue in the theme of Aunt May being an old lady. I'll get to that. Now here we go, little Archie. This would be the third guy that I was influenced by the most. First was Kirby. This would be this guy. His name is Bob Balling. And basically he came to Archie to draw Archie comics, but his style didn't really suit the teenage antics of Archie and his gang. It was a little more like Ditko, a little more creepy. So they let him have little Archie, and basically he wrote and drew the stories on his own. They left him alone. He was very little editing went on, except that he had to keep it clean, keep it a Christian comic, and he did. He came up with some really fabulous issues. Interestingly, the page I pulled out, if I trace the layout of that page, I don't think anybody would know the difference. Simply, his work is so ingrained in my head that I naturally take from him and lay out my pages the way tell the story the way he does, just because I love these comics so much, especially those top 3 panels. Mr. Weatherby looking at the clock, he's thinking about it, calls his wife. Now I want to start talking about his wife. The middle tier, second panel, and then the last 2 panels. See, when I grew up, old ladies with corn-rimmed glasses ran the world. They were mean, but you listened to them. They were the voice of authority. They barked orders at you. You did not mess with them, and you listened to them. I mean, they're gone now. Where are all the old ladies now? They dye their hair and jog, and I don't know, watch Ghost Hunters. I don't know. It's different now. The generation gap was different, but like I said, I guess just because I was a kid and the old ladies that I met were principals, teachers, doctors, whatever, librarians, but you didn't mess with these ladies. So, and I think that this Bob Balling's attitude in this, what he put into the story really plays into that. How he's calling her up, and she owns 51% of the bank stock. You can't mess with her. So here's some more old ladies. Well, first you got the really lovely cover of the Archie being visited by the aliens and the mysterious egg. On the top of the page, you have Miss Grundy, who is Archie's teacher, actually introduced in the teenage Archie stories, and she's wearing the same dress. She looks exactly the same. But what works for me is that when you're a little kid, adults stay the same. And when you're an adult, kids change. Kids grow from little to big, but you stay the same. So that kind of works for me, that later on Miss Grundy is still Archie's teacher, and she's actually, this is a kind of a cute scene where she's just telling him, go to the library and find out what pterodactyls eat. So I pulled this page out because the 2 panels in the middle, I can't, nobody, this is Archie Comics. This was Marvel or DC or anybody else who's doing this stuff. The panel where little Archie's walking into the library is almost mysterious, because what Bob Bowling would do, and not a lot of artists would do, is give him a shadow, showing you what time of day it is. The bare trees shows you that it's the fall or the early winter. He would just do it by drawings and just completely leave out all the dialogue or captions, and then, little Archie going into the mysterious library. Then you got one of the mean old ladies again. And when I was a kid, I could swear I could see that lady lift her head up as he walks in, and all she has to do is glare at him. And we all knew it was unspoken. We all knew, don't mess around in there. So anyway, I just wanted to give it to the old ladies who are no longer around, who used to run our lives. Anyway, so this is Bob Bowling. He's of the three guys that influenced me the most in comic books. Okay, now we start approaching graphic novels. Classics Illustrated was a series of comics that basically took books this thick and squeezed them into 40 pages. But they would take the best parts out, the more, I guess, exciting parts. And this was the first one I ever saw, and the cover, again, scared the hell out of me. But it's one of my favorite covers, because I just love how, it's not going for any hard sell. It's all muted color, it's brown, and I never noticed that you couldn't see the Invisible Man's face or his wrists until my brother Mario pointed him out. Well, see, this guy's invisible. I didn't know what that meant. I just thought, what the hell am I looking at? Because to me it looked like a photograph. I was so young, I thought, well, this is what, there's a movie, there's a book, and this and that, but I didn't care. I just loved the cover so much. I remember going to the first Comic-Con and seeing it, and I think it was like, on sale for like $60 or something. And now it's like 60,000 or something. But who had $60,000? 60, Here's the 2 pages from the interior. This started to inspire me or impress me about technique in art when I was very young. You have the lady of the inn who's here. People are complaining there's these weird noises in one of her rooms, but nobody can ever see her, the guy, the person in the room come in or out. So she goes to look, and then obviously the Invisible Man is upset because he throws the blanket at the bottom, and then he throws the hat at her, and he kicks her out with shoving her out with the chair. And that last panel is really weird because it almost looks religious the way the light is playing. And he used this, I'm not really sure what kind of technique. It looks like he sprayed ink on there to give it the creepy shadows and stuff. The artist's name is Norman Nodell. And I don't know what inspired him to do it that way, but what was kind of cool about the artist in those days is that he wasn't paid extra to be artistic. He was just paid to tell the story. But sometimes these guys are get inspired and want to do stuff like this. The good artists. If you look at old EC comics with the Wally Wood art and how much work he put into it, he wasn't paid extra to do that. He wanted to do that. He wanted his stuff to look good. So anyway, the idea of telling a story like a novel was starting to percolate in my head. Not that remember, I'm a little kid. Not that I did anything with it, because the next day I was reading Jimmy Olsen comics again. But okay, I'm gonna get in trouble for this one. But now the spaceship in the middle. I swear to God, I didn't notice that till I was a teenager. I swear to God, I was like maybe 10, 11 when I first saw this comic. But that's not my point. I just want to get that out of the way in case. This was a series of, Charlton was like the bottom of the barrel of comic books in the 60s. You bought Charlton comics because you ran out of comics to buy. but because they had that freedom, they could do whatever they wanted to. There was no guidelines like Marvel and DC. So, okay, so what happened here is this was a premiere comic where each issue would have different subjects. The first issue had 3 stories about different kinds of superheroes. Well, the second issue, I'm not really sure what the original issue was going to be, but it just turns out that it fell through. And they literally had 2 weeks to get it to the printer because it's pre-sold and all that stuff. So they got Denny O'Neil, who still writes comics now, and an artist named Pat Boyette, who's passed on, to knock this thing out in 2 weeks. Well, since they had to do it so fast, they just knocked it out, and barely an editor saw it. They just knocked it out, and they stuck the Comics code on there because it's clean, because they looked through the page real quick. But the story is really nuts. It's a science fiction story about the end of the world and mutants and this and that, and they have to turn back the clock to stop the mutant strain from happening. This and that, probably knocked off of an Outer Limits episode or something. But to me, when I read it, it was such an epic. It was just an epic told in 24 pages, and it was self-contained. So as a kid, I thought, well, yeah, you can do whole stories in one book, one comic. The story still reads pretty well today, especially considering how fast they did it, and since they didn't have any editorial restrictions, too much anyway, except for the cover. Well, I wouldn't say it's a restriction, but. The artist has passed since then, so I can't ask him about that spaceship. And I asked the writer about. He didn't want to talk about the book. He said, "Oh, that's the past. I don't care about that stuff." Do you like my Batman comics? I say, "No, I want to talk about this." Denny's a nice guy. More science fiction. This was probably the first comic book I've ever read, or ever saw. I'm sorry, I was too small to read, but it was exciting. It was just like on a counter at home, and I just thought, this is just amazing. What's going on here? A guy has a TV set on his head. It's a cute little story. It's actually a guy who gets his home computer, who's going to do that? Stuck on his head, and he can't tell everybody how to save the world. Another saving the world from atomic, stuff. And so he goes around, but the electronic brain basically gives him this radioactive power, so whatever he touches explodes. So he can't tell anybody or show anybody how to save the world. And after a while, the police are just following him, and everybody, and it's on the news, and everybody's watching, going like, "What's he doing? He just keeps blowing up weird stuff." And then his son, who's like around 12, goes, "I know what he's doing, Dad. We used to play this game where he would come up with all these photographs and images, and I would have to figure out what the code was. There was a code for some kind of, some sentence or something." And he goes, "I know what he's doing." So he wrote down all the things his dad touched, and it just turns out to be a scientific formula, And so the kid figures it out. They cure the planet, and they cure his take off the TV off his head, so he's fine. But I just thought it was such a great story. I didn't read it till later. I was just impressed by the imagery because I guess because of this cover, I really like science fiction from those days where you had the heavy contrast of people with casual clothes and then the science fiction right next to it, like a TV show like The Outer Limits, He's wearing a suit with his computer on his head. So from then on, I've always liked that. So you'll see a lot of that in my kind of stories where I do science fiction, and I like that contrast. Okay, then we start to get heavy. This was the last issue of Weird Fantasy, I believe, right when the Comics Code came in and the U.S. Senate, basically said, "Stop doing this horrible crap, or you're out of business." So they stopped doing these comics, but what impressed me the most, I didn't see EC Comics till the late '60s, where I saw paperback reprinting these stories. They were black and white, and you looked at it sideways because they printed the panels sideways, and I thought, wow, these are really cool comics, except there's so many damn words. I still think there's too many damn words in EC Comics, but what the heck, they're well written. This is a story drawn, I don't know who wrote it, but a story drawn by Joe Orlando, who was a DC editor later. But that last panel, just the light bulb in my head just exploded. I just thought, what's going on here? I've never seen this before in a comic. I've never seen this before in a movie. I've never seen this before anywhere. That was a for real black man that might have lived in my neighborhood, and here he is as a scientist astronaut. And I just thought, wait a minute, where's this been? You don't see this in Marvel DC. You don't see it anywhere else. I always thought that was just a magnificent panel. He probably took it from a photograph because the shading was just so nice. And anyway, that was like the one panel that just knocked me out. Just to put in the back of my head that comics, this could be bigger than what we're seeing in comics. This could be bigger than superheroes and all that stuff. I didn't know what to do with it. Like I said, I went back to Jimmy Olsen right away. But I always remembered that panel, and I still do. I still look at it like that's just amazing that they did that. But before then, in entertainment, basically black men were clowns. This is the first time I ever saw one as a person, and he was in a comic book. And they got a lot of shit for doing that, by the way. They told them to change the patent and stuff, they refused, and there's a whole history behind it. All right. Now we're probably and #1 influence. Before Kirby, Bob Bong, and this guy. There's a guy named Owen Fitzgerald. Basically, he was an animator that went to comics, and he was drawing Bob Hope comics and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis comics. When Dean and Jerry broke up, they became Jerry Lewis comics, but I'm still waiting for that Dean Martin comic. So anyway, and so when the Dennis franchise took off, Hank Ketchum had an artist named Al Weisman start out with the Dennis comics. But it's really weird because his style, I should have had an example here, but his style didn't really suit Dennis. He was more like Dan Klaus or Chris Ware doing a Dennis the Menace. Very technical, very precise lines and this and that. Where, you know, Ketchum himself, his style is loose. So to lessen the burden on Al Weisman and everything, he hired Owen Fitzgerald, who was such a whiz, he could approximate Ketchum's style. That's interesting. Looking at Dennis's mom on the cover there, Hyman and I have used that pose over and over and over without knowing it. Just her expression, the cartoonish expression. And you'll see, and I just doing the slideshow, I've done it a couple of nights now, I've never noticed how much his influence is in our drawings. So I'll just go through the story real quick. I have the whole story up. I just want to go through it real quick at how good I think this guy is and why he's top of the heap. First panel, you see Dennis's dad shaving, coming downstairs. He knows it's April Fool's Day. He sneaks up at his wife. April Fool's, everyone's breakfast. Now I want you to look at the body language of the mom. Everything she's doing, everything they're doing in the story is just so perfectly rendered. That you don't even have to read it to know what's going on because it's just the way she's scolding him. Hey, look what you did the breakfast. Now you clean it up, and I got to start over. Next round, he's cleaning it up. He's saying it's April Fool's Day. I want to fool Dennis. And she's making breakfast again, and she's angry at him because he's like, I'm going to fool Dennis. He fools us all the time. I'm going to fool him. She's like, well, don't go too far. So her attitude is like that through the whole story. Henry, the dad, tells Dennis, hey, you can have pancakes. Hey, have it with ketchup. Dennis goes, okay, I'll have the ketchup. At the bottom panel, you see the mom saying, oh, come on, please. Next page, she's glaring at him. The mom's glaring at him because Dennis is just pouring that stuff in the room. Next panel, see, she's still glaring at him. She's just like, okay, Dennis eats it. He loves it, of course. He eats it. Dad, you try it. Oh, no, I don't want to. The mom's laughing. And then, because he doesn't want to be that big a jerk, he decides to eat it too. Of course, it's horrible. And then he's trying to think of another way to fool Dennis. Mom turns around, turns on the radio, and he thinks of something. He just thinks of something out of the top of his head. Look, fine saucer! And he's like, Dennis says, wait. And then he looks out, yay, a real fine saucer! And they're like, huh? And then you have poor mom cleaning up the mess again. Dennis got excited with that. Turns out that the Air Force was sent up an experimental rocket. And, so Dennis' joke again. And Dennis goes, wow, you figured that out before you said it on the radio. And the mom's saying, oh, he's very smart. The next page, Dennis is going out and going, he's having a great time. And Dad's going, I gotta fool him. She's like, come on, leave him alone. So he calls up Mr. Wilson. And Mr. Wilson, of course, wants to get back at Dennis. So Mr. Wilson, he's digging a flower bed, but he tells Dennis the treasure. He pulls out a nickel that he planted in there, and Dennis is like, hey, let me try it. So as child abuse stories go, they make him dig the flower bed as they watch him glow. But Dennis finds something. Oh, it's just a teapot, and he's disappointed. It's no treasure. But Mr. Wilson looks at it, because look, the date is in 1802. It could be a Paul Revere silver, Paul Revere pot. And they go, oh, great. And Mr. Wilson goes, hey, this could be worth a lot of money. Hey, April Fool's Day. So Henry's bummed, like, oh man, how am I going to get back at this kid? So he goes, I'm going to use the old trick. The old trick of getting the wallet, tying a string to it, and pulling it in front of Dennis, and that'll be my satisfaction. The mom's just not buying it. So, okay, here's the last 3 panels are interesting. Okay, Henry's sneaking out, but look at the panel in the last page, the back, where it's just Henry's butt, and he's crawling under the bushes. Now, any place like Marvel and DC or any other comic book company would just tell him, like, well, what's the dialogue? Or what's he doing there? Or our kid's going to get it? They'd go through all this crap, but it's just a great panel. You know what's going on. he just looks goofy, just climbing under a bush to fool his son. It's a great panel, no words. Next panel, Dennis says, "Hey, wallet." He's like, "Ah, finally." And he pulls the string, snap. Dennis gets the wallet. And then he shows him, "Look, it's got money in it." And Mom goes, "Oh, sure it does." He goes, "Hey, wait a minute." And then the Mom Alice says, "Oh, I think he deserves a reward." Okay, here's a reward. And Moms just can't hold him in anymore. First page, last panel. Just busted up. Again, I just want to emphasize her body language and her reaction to everything, the character's reactions to everything. And then on the top page of the second page, she's just telling him, "Dennis, he's just trying to fool you all day." And Dennis was like, "Why?" Dennis says, "It's because it's April Fool's Day." And Dennis goes, "I had the best time. This is a great day. I love this day." And so then he's like, "Okay, all right, what the heck. I lose, but, Dennis is happy." And so at the end, Dennis yells at Dennis, April Fool on you. I just wanted to emphasize how important the way he drew, the way he staged the story, bringing out the characters like that. He was just the final, light bulb in my head that I go, this is the way I got to do comics. I want to communicate. I want to make people. I know these are for children, the Dennis comics and Little Archie and those. But I thought this could work for comic books for older readers or anybody. This could work. And I've always gone back to them. So those are the influences mentioned in Marvel Season, and the strongest ones, I guess, that influenced me to do comics for 30 years. And here I am. Of course, there's dozens more, like newspaper strips, like Peanuts and Dick Tracy and stuff. But these are the guys that really got me to put pen to paper. Anybody have any questions? A few questions from the no? Okay.
Where do you keep all your awards at?
All one of them? Doorstop, like classic store. Oh, I got a couple awards, but they're just gathering dust because I don't want to put them in a couple of plaques.
There's somebody behind you has a question.
Oh, man. Yes.
Quick question. Pat Boyette, the artist you mentioned, is that the same Pat Boyette who directed the Dungeons and Dragons and later directed a bunch of horror films? Or a couple, I should say.
I'm glad you brought that up. The artist who did that spaceship, the science fiction story, Children of Doom, yes, actually he was a director-screenwriter. And he did make a horror movie called Dungeon and Harrow. Yeah, it's true. I've seen it. It's pretty good. Yeah. The crazy villain in it looks like Dennis Rodman, but this is in the 60s, why not? But it's an interesting movie, and I didn't even know he was a filmmaker, screenwriter until well after he passed. But that's a good thing to bring up.
And movies have influenced you. What are some of the movies that have influenced your storytelling and art?
Boy, when you're a kid, it's mostly monster movies, of course, and luckily the first monster movies I saw were the Universal horror movies, so I understood I'm not an artist who knows how to shade, use dark and light, but that's what their movies were about, darkness and lightness, and they weren't necessarily like scary movies, except for small children. They just had a cool look to them and a cool tone to them. And that was something I definitely picked up on when I was a kid. I mean, there's a lot of movies. I like I like them from B movies to Z movies to A pictures. My mind's going blank. Another question? Yes.
How has living in Las Vegas kind of influenced you? I don't know how long you've been living there for, but
I've been living there for 11 years. Because when we were living here, my daughter was born, and we were looking for a house. We were living in a small place, and we thought a house would be nicer. And the landlord was selling the house, so we'd heard good things about Vegas as far as buying a house with the yard, the whole bit. But we looked around here for a while, looking for a house in L.A. Yeah, that crack house looks pretty good. Hey, those guys mad dogging us with the Uzis, they might be nice guys. We just gave up on that, and we looked around. So we moved to Vegas, and I'm happy. For myself, personally, I like it because it's the slower pace, and I'm doing more work than I've ever had because I'm not distracted, so much. Or maybe just getting old. But I like it. It's okay. It would be nice to move back here. But you must fix that traffic problem. My flight here was 44 minutes, and it took us almost 2 hours to drive from LAX to here. So, there you go. Hector?
Yeah, I know you've like dabbled in cable television. I was just wondering what's kept you guys from going into films and writing scripts?
Well, the main reason is they never want to pay us. Everything must be on spec. You know, Hyman and I have written Love and Rocket scripts before, and nobody wanted to pay us for it. They just kept telling us what was wrong with it. They didn't want it, so we just gave up on it. You know, it's a business. You got to treat, people. If they're going to work for you, you got to pay them. You know, it's simple as that. I mean, I hate to, keep it on that idiotic level, but it's true. They want everything for free, and they want to take credit for it if it does get made. And okay, meet me halfway. So, let's work together that way. I'm just not going to give you any ideas or do anything for you unless. I'm talking about Hollywood. I work differently with comics publishers, but we've talked to Time Warner. We've talked to guys in camcorders. We've talked to everybody all in the middle. It's just because it's not something I want to change. That's a problem as well. This Palomar thing. Does it have to be a small village? Okay. This Luba character, does she have to look like that? It's like, well, what do you want? They want anything because they have no idea. So, of their own. Yes.
When you first published your first Love and Rockets, at that time, I guess I was really young, and so I didn't really understand comics and distribution and stuff like that. So, how difficult was it, or could you tell us a little bit of the things that you had to overcome? Because at that time, I was thinking, there was only Marvel and DC and the biggies. I didn't really know what an independent comic was. And were there many of them out there at that point?
Not when we started. The ones the examples we had of successful ones were early on. Would be the underground comics, but because they was actually sold very well compared to. Considering they were adults only and they were black and white, going against the Marvel comics, but they did really well because of the hippie culture. But they tended to fade out because whatever the interest in them started to wane. Even though there's still good artists doing them, like Robert Crumb, Gilbert Sheldon, Clay Wilson, but it kind of faded. And also they were like hard drinking, drug doing, hippies, so they didn't last very long doing comics. But the interest in black and white independent comics was always around. It just wasn't a big deal because Harvey Pekar started American Splendor, I think, in 1976, and that was just unheard of. He just wanted to do it because they figured it was just he was at the tail end of Underground, but he was actually the beginning of something new. 2 books before Love and Rockets that stood on their own was of all things was Cerebus and ElfQuest. But the thing is, I didn't know that they had a built-in audience. I didn't know there was an audience for fairy stories and elves and things like that. That's why ElfQuest took off. And then Cerebus was pretty much a Conan lift, but using a funny animal, satire. So those had built-in audiences. We didn't have a built-in audience. So luckily, the timing was such that when we felt like doing our comic, Hyman did this Maggie and Hopi series right away. It was about punk girls, which it just grabbed the audience immediately. Luckily, it's great that he did that first thing because that's what grabbed people right away. The fact that he drew so well too, that's the thing about comics. It's still like that. There's always talking about concepts and the scripts and the writing and stuff, but really the browser looks at the art. If you look at something that looks crappy, you're not going to go back to it. So luckily, with Hyman's really good art, people stuck to it. They looked at it and go, I want to see more of this. Hey, this is really good. And then the stuff with the punk girls seeped in. And so I started Palomar just because there was the other half of the book to fill in. And I didn't have, it was already selling and getting noticed with Hyman's work, so I knew that I could do something that I could take a chance on. Because maybe I wouldn't have done that right away. So after doing a couple of issues of the Rockets, it warmed me up, doing really long stories. I got the Palomar, and the timing was right. So.
What was your inspiration for those first couple of Palomar stories, Healing Diaquilin?
And
and Heartbreak Sleep. I mean, I thought I've been a reader since 1988, so
Yeah. But in my estimation, those things were almost, I mean, those approaching literature, actually, the writing in those instances. Seriously, I'm you know, professionally. And, but what was your inspiration for those? I mean, were these stories kicking around in your head for years and years, and you just come out when you created them on the page?
They were actually kicking around for years. They're a mixture of so many different things. Those three artists I talked about, for one thing, as far as drawing, the actual drawing of it was inspired by those artists. I grew up in a small neighborhood where there was when you see Marvel season, it's just sort of a microcosm of your world, and I guess what they talk about magic realism now was basically normal life when you're a kid. You know, there's a house down the street that you don't go to because there's ghosts there or something. But it was part of your life. It wasn't like a magical thing or strange. It was more like, okay, you just don't go there, and there's ghosts there, and you just sort of live with it. And that's what magic realism is that stuff you live with, right next to reality, but you don't question it. And I've always liked that growing up, hearing stories about weird ghost stories or weird mysteries or whatever. And they're always doing somebody real, like, oh, your uncle did this, and he was walking down the street, and so, that stuff. I've always thought that there should be a place for those stories. And I really wanted to be original at the beginning, right away. I didn't want to do what everybody else is doing, only because I don't know how. I only know how to do what's in my own imagination. I just started just putting that stuff together little by little, and watching films, of course. You watch a good film, a widescreen John Ford film, and that's how you see landscapes, and you see the spread. A big scene where there's a mountain in the corner and a little tiny house there. You start to see that as that can work. Whereas a lot of artists like to put in a lot of detail and clutter everything to show how good they draw. But I was more into showing vistas and the expanse. When you see the world as a kid, it's very large, and the sky is very big. And that's what I put in the Marvel suit. You'll notice there's rarely any close-ups of buildings and such. They're all in the distance because that's how they look like to me when I was growing up. But in Palomar, it was just, God, a lot of stuff. I just felt like drawing the things that came from growing up and putting that in stories that might be interesting. I mean, I wanted to do melodramatic stories. They call them soap operas, but I call it melodrama or fiction. It was a combination of so many things that just all came together, and it was just the timing was good for me because I was ready to do it. I didn't second guess. I didn't look back. I didn't know it was going to work. I'm happy it did. But really, we always looked at Love and Rockets looking forward, never looking back. Like this could go wrong, or what's going to happen to us. No, we just went forward because we had no other way to express ourselves the way the comics did. Okay, back there.
Based off of what you said about having conversations with Jack Kirby, would you say that a lot of those negative rumors about Stanley, and I know there's a lot out there, are somewhat true?
There's a lot of them, so I couldn't really pinpoint
Well, I
that
don't
one.
want to.
No, I suppose Kirby was just angry that, and Ditko, this is why he left as well. It's just that they were a team and they were working together, and somehow they were creating these characters who were obviously going somewhere, and there was a big promise that everybody would share in the wealth equally. Well, that never happens with artists. There's always somebody on top, and then the artists are like saying, "Hey, where's my money? Oh, you'll get it. You'll get it." And there's a story. I'm not sure if it's true that when Steve Ditko, got sick of that, he goes, "Wait a minute! I co-created Spider-Man with you and Doctor Strange. Where's my part of the money? Stanley's doing great." He goes, "Oh, you'll get it. Don't worry, you'll get it." So he went to Jack Kirby. Like I said, I'm not sure this is a true story, but I've heard it from several people. He went to Jack Kirby and says, "Come on, this is just as a team. Let's just fight this. Let's fight this." Kirby was raising a family. Ditko's single, and I think. And Kirby was raising a family, and he thought about it. He goes, "No, I got to stick around. Right? This is how I make a living, and this and that." So Ditko left, and then later Kirby, 3 years later. So I guess it was just the whole hostility about Stanley taking credit for everything. I mean, you watch that crappy ass show, Comic Book Men, and all Kevin Smith talks about how fucking Stanley invented everything. It's like, you're full of shit, man. You wrote dialogue. That's not creating the characters. That's not laying out the pages and drawing them. Stanley was a great editor and a great scripter. He was. That's why Marvel was, a little higher than. Because I mean, if you look at Jack Kirby and Ditko stuff without Stanley, it's not quite as good. It's more, it might be as inventive and creative. Anyway, I guess the hostility was just that Stan Lee took credit for everything. Because as soon as Jack Kirby left, did you notice that's when it said Stan Lee Presents. Stan Lee Presents Captain America. Well, they fixed that. He had nothing to do with Captain America. You see that in movies now, finally. You know. But anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's just me grousing. Hi.
I'm a big fan, and I especially love your complex female characters. They're really tough, but vulnerable. And I'm fascinated by interviews I've read about you and your brother being really influenced by your mom. You know, a single Latina mom. And so I guess I'm just wondering if you've been able to tap into a new generation of readers, and maybe talking to them at Comic-Con or other places like this, and if you have a young female readership, either old stuff or new stuff.
You know, that's hard for me to say now. It's hard to tell because it was, now, because we've been around so long, the age group is so varied, you know, because first it was, you know, young people mostly. And now it's very, and the attraction, I think originally, again, was the Maggie and Hopi stories, because the young female readers saw themselves directly in the stories. You know, whereas I would be, my stories were a little more distant, but they were still, you know, interested in the female characters. So that's so what I don't know what, you know, how that works. I don't know how, you know, I'm just happy it does. Guy back there.
How big are your original drawings, or have they always been like the same size when you first started?
They were about 11 by 17 originally, because it was the magazine we were doing. And then we did the comic book size, so I started shrinking it. And now a lot of my pages, I don't even know it's as big as this laptop here thing. You know, it's just like, they're this small. But I draw pretty close to the printed size. Not for, simply because I just like it better. I just like the way, you know, I get the line better and the way the pencils work. It's pretty small, actually. Most people don't draw that small. They usually draw fairly large. Whenever my stuff's up at a gallery show with other people, the other artists go like, why you draw small? Why? And I go, well, it's just, my art's made for reproduction. It's not for galleries, you know. Other people's, like Chris Ware's stuff is made for galleries. If you go see a Chris Ware show at a gallery, it's amazing. It's just gigantic diagrams and all the stuff that he comes up with. But his comics don't interest me that much. just know. I mean, I know Chris. He's a cool guy. I'm just not all that wild about that technical stuff in comics. I like the more, you know, homey stuff. One more question. Mr. Hatfield.
Girls and boys in Marvel season. I love the way that you wrote the girls and the boys both separately and together. And it seemed like there were certain things that the girls were getting in Marvel season that like Huey wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Was that sort of, and I'm wondering to what extent those child characters are based on memory, what extent they're observation. Did those characters come to you as drawings? Did they come to you as personalities? Like, okay, like this, let's say Lana or Chava, or do they start as drawing in your head, or do they start with people you actually remember doing those things?
This Marvel season was a little different because I already knew, since I'd been, those experiences have been in my head since they happened, for 40 years, or so. I don't remember how long. But I don't know. It was just writing that was one of the easiest things I've ever written, because I just said, oh yeah, this happened, and then this happened. And I guess maybe this person felt this way. Because I would make up people also to fit the, because there wasn't that many girls around when those things happened. Not a lot. I put them in the story because I didn't want that contrast. I wanted a different type of thinking going on. Because I was so involved. I mean, obviously you see what Huey goes through in the story. I mean, that was pretty much what I was like. I was just oblivious to everybody else's ideas and thoughts. And when I would try to do something and I would get this negative response, I was more like confused, like, don't you understand what I'm doing? Yet I would step back and go, oh, they're right, this is really stupid, But I would just get too involved in what I was doing. I was pretty, I guess my imagination always worked overtime, and I finally put it to work in comics, But it's really hard to describe where things come from, why I did them with certain characters. It's almost like I do them in my sleep. I don't know, it's a phantom person in my head that does that for me, and I just, the guy who draws it. I don't know how to explain it. It's my brain just works that way. I can get the best of you though if you don't corral it. If you don't put, it's like proper editing in this story. It can just go on forever. The whole story is just about what it's like to be 10 years old. And that's it. That netherworld, that world where you're just 10 years old, no beginning, no end. Whereas I know getting toward the end of the story, I felt I better give him something. A little something to wrap this up, to bring this all around. When you read the book, you'll see it. But anyway, that's it. I can't. Those are the hardest questions. No, only because I've been doing it for 30 years and I still don't know how I do it or why. Well, thanks a lot. I can't. That's